So lay down your hurt, lay down your heart, come as you are.
Praying's awesome. So we've been in Judges, right? You guys all know Judges has been an exciting and up and down kind of book. We're coming to the end of Judges, though. All right, we're nearing the end. So Judges has been a book that simply has been Israel continually turning their back on God, right? Has that been kind of like the motto that we've been seeing? Israel just keep on turning their backs on God. God then responds, delivers them, frees them, and then what do? They turn their back on God, and then again, God comes again and delivers them, and he delivers them through a judge, right? He calls up a judge to deliver them from the bondage from another people. So now we're coming to the part of this book where this is the final judge of judges. This is the last judge. A lot of us know who this judge is. You guys have heard of him. You know a lot about him. You guys love his story. I'm sure they share his story. You guys hear this story a lot. Samson. You guys know Samson? Big, strong Samson. What else was Samson known for? His long hair, right? His strength. His long hair and his strength. I hope by the end of this morning you kind of get even a different perspective of the story of Samson. Because I think it's really interesting. I was reading through Samson. Samson is actually the largest amount written about a judge. So Samson was talked about the most out of all the judges. So I'm going to have to do it all in one time. Because we could do him, we could talk about him 3-4 times, but Pastor Chris said, no, Sam, you got to do it all at once. I'm like, all right. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to summarize and all that. But as I was reading through Samson, I just started feeling like, man, I know this guy. How do I know this guy? Like he sounds, and I'm reading him, like he sounds so familiar. He looks so familiar. And you know who I thought of when I was reading through Samson? If this works. This guy. Do you guys know who this guy is? Some of you guys don't know who this is. I'm sorry. I'm a football head, so like, this is what I thought of. This is Rob Gronkowski. He's like one of the most massive, strongest, most dominant players in the league when he's healthy. He's been injured lately. But I thought of him because he's big and strong, like Samson is, and he's a jock. He's a jock's jock, right? Like you guys know what jocks are known for. I was reading through Samson, and I realized, like, man, Samson was the first jock in the world. He really was. Big, he was strong, right? His weakness was women, right? He loved hip-hop. Do you guys know that he loved hip-hop? Because he would say riddles if you read through 13 through 15, Judges 13 through 15, he would speak in riddles all the time. He'd be riddling. I'm like, man, this guy if there was hip-hop back then, he would be the first artist. Because he was speaking in riddles all the time. He also had anger issues, right? He was always angry. Something happened, he'd rage. And he also made a lot of stupid decisions because of the women in his life. This dude was the jock. This dude was a jock's jock. I can say I was a football player, and I've been around a lot of jocks, and my boy Ruben can tell you, that's a jock. Right? So, he was the first jock. So I'm gonna summarize just a little bit of his story for you guys. All right. I know some of you guys know the story, but I'm gonna zip through chapters 13 through 15. I suggest you read it on your own time. But I'm gonna focus on 16. But I'm gonna summarize the first 3 chapters that he's spoken about. Is that cool? We're gonna run through it real quick. All right. First thing about Samson is that God called him from birth to deliver Israel from the Philistines. So this is the first time God called a judge from birth to be the deliverer of Israel. All right? So he goes, it's Judges 13, you can see it there. Next thing is interesting is that he finds a Philistine woman that he wants to marry. All right? So real quick, at this time, the Philistines were the ones that were oppressing Israel. All right? So the Philistines were the ones that God wanted Samson to deliver Israel from. But here we see that he finds a Philistine woman to want to marry. So obviously there is some issue there, right? Contrast of culture and all that is going on. But we don't realize that if you read it in Judges 14:4, it says that was a part of God's plan so that Israel can penetrate the Philistines. So that's interesting that God was strategic in that. Next thing happens, and you guys know this story, is that when he was on his way to Israel to see his wife, he tore up a lion in half because a lion was attacking him. You guys remember that story? Some of us do. Like, he's known for that strength, right? And he tore up a lion. That's crazy. Another thing that happened is at the wedding banquet, when they were doing the wedding for him and the Philistine woman, there was a lot of drama that happened. All right? I'm going to recap the drama real quick. He has 30 men, Philistine men. So back then that was a tradition that you have 30 men that kind of go alongside you in the wedding ceremony, because it's a 7-day ceremony. They celebrated weddings there. Yeah. 7 days. And he gave these 30 men, they were Philistine men, he gave them a riddle. Remember I told y'all he was a hip-hop fan. So he gave them a riddle. And he said, if you guys figure out this riddle, I will give each of you garments, like very expensive garments. But if you guys don't get the riddle, if you don't get the riddle, then you will give me, each of you will give me expensive garments. So that upset the 30 men. First off, they were trying to figure it out, but then it upset them because they were like, is this guy trying to like steal our stuff? Is this guy like trying to make us poor? So they got really angry, and they went to Samson's wife, and they threatened her that we will kill you and your family if you don't tell us what the riddle is. And obviously, she told them, and then Samson found out. Yeah, it was drama. So then Samson got angry, he got upset, and he fled because he didn't want to like respond. And that was a good thing that he did. He just left because he was so angry. And the crazy part is that when he came back, his wife's dad gave her to another man because he thought that Samson fled from his wife, didn't want to be with her. So Samson got angry. He got angry. He went on a rampage, and he ended up killing 1,000 Philistines with the donkey jawbone. You guys remember that story? Yeah. So that you can, again, in Judges 15, you see that happen. So you see a war going on, right? But it's 1 against 1,000, and the one wins. That's crazy, right? And he was judge over Israel for 20 years. So that's a quick recap. This reminds me, this story when I was reading through, I was like, man, this is like an action film, right? I'm reading it, I'm like, man, this is exciting. It's like an action film. I found this little thing, I'm like, that's the action film promo right there. I'm like, Samson, and he has like the jawbone. That's actually the real, like what a donkey jawbone looks like, which is interesting because it has a handle and it has ridges for the teeth and it has a sharp edge, which would be great for battle. So when I first read it, I didn't see a picture of a jawbone. I thought like he had like a donkey skull and was just like, I'm like, how do you do that? But when I saw this, I was like, well, okay, that makes more sense. But that's a quick recap, right, of Samson's story from 13 through 15. But then chapter 16, which is the last chapter of Samson's story, takes a very interesting twist. Very, very interesting twist. Again, the first 3 chapters of his story were like an action film. But 16 is like a romance novel. It's really interesting, like a novella, like a soap opera, right? It's really interesting. So if you can go there with me, that's cool. Judges 16. I think it's page 255 in the Bibles in front of you. Page 255. We're going to read the whole chapter together. We're going to go into this story and it's really, really cool. I know it's a lot of verses, but it's entertaining verses. And I'm going to try to, animate it so that we can feel like we're in the story. Are you guys all there? If you're there, just look up at me so I know you're there. Don't start reading. Chapter 16, we're actually going to start on verse 4. Yeah. I was thinking of reading the first 3, but then I would have had to explain a lot of other stuff. So you can read that and ask Pastor Chris about it later. Just going to start on verse 4. We good? All right. Judges 16, starting at verse 4. Remember, novella. Just think of that. It's the story of Samson and Delilah. All right, starting at verse 4. Here we go. Sometime later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And valley of Sorek was a valley where the Philistines lived. So she was a Philistine woman. Verse 5. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, "See if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him so that we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver." So when I read that, I was like, man, is that a lot of money? I don't even know. So I looked it up because shekels actually are still used today in the Middle East. We use shekels. My peoples do. So I looked it up. I was like, 1,100 shekels of silver. How much is that in today's dollar? And I looked it up, and it was actually $12,500. 1,100 shekels of silver. It was $12,500. But that's not how much she was going to get, because it says, each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver. So I'm assuming, at the very least, there's like 5 liters, right? At least. So she was going to get $62,500, approximately. That's a chunk of change for one act, right? So just so you kind of get a perspective of what she's kind of like, what her motive is. All right, we're going to continue, verse 6. So Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued." Samson answered her, "If anyone ties me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I'll become as weak as any other man." Then the rulers of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she tied him with them. With men hidden in the room, she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you!" But he snapped the bowstrings as easily as a piece of string snaps when it comes close to a flame. The secret of his strength was not discovered. Then Delilah said to Samson, "You have made a fool of me. You lied to me. Come now, tell me how you can be tied." He said, "If anyone ties me securely with new ropes that have never been used, I'll become as weak as any other man." So Delilah took new ropes and tied him with them. Then with men hidden in the room, she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the ropes off his arms as if they were threads. Delilah then said to Samson, "All this time you have been making a fool of me and lying to me. Tell me how you can be tied." He replied, "If you weave the 7 braids of my head into the fabric of the loom and tighten it with the pin, I'll become as weak as any other man." So while he was sleeping, Delilah took the 7 braids of his head, wove them into the fabric, and tightened it with the pin. Again, she called him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He woke from his sleep and pulled the pin and the loom with the fabric. Then she said to him, "How can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the 3rd time you have made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength." With such nagging, prodding him day after day, he was sick to death of it. Remember, a novella. This is it. This is as good as it gets. Verse 17. So he told her everything. He was done. He was like, "All right. No razor has ever been used on my head," he said, because I have been a Nazirite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man. When Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines, come back once more. He has told me everything. So the rulers of the Philistines returned with the silver in their hand. So they kept their promise. After putting him to sleep on her lap, that drives me crazy, because, yeah. She called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. Then she called, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He woke from his sleep and thought, I'll go out just as before and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord left him. Then the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza. Binding him with bronze shackles, they set him to grinding grain in the prison. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. We're going to close it out real quick, all right? Now the rulers of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to celebrate, saying, our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands. When the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste on our land and multiplied our slain. While they were in high spirits, they shouted, bring out Samson to entertain us. So they called Samson out the prison, and he performed for them. That's crazy. He became an entertainment figure for them, which is interesting. Continuing. When they stood him among the pillars, Samson said to the servant who held his hand, put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, so that I may lean against them. Now the temple was crowded with men and women. All the rulers of the Philistines were there. And on the roof were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Then Samson reached toward the 2 central pillars on which the temple stood, bracing himself against them, his right hand on one and his left hand on the other. Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. Then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than he did when he lived. Then his brothers and his father's whole family went down to get him. They brought him back and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah, his father. He had led Israel for 20 years. Crazy, right? Crazy novella story that just took a twist and went all over the place, and everybody ended up dying. It's one of those stories, right? Everybody ends up dying. It's like Romeo and Juliet or something. Thank you for bearing with me. I hope it was an entertaining passage. I know it's long, but it was entertaining. I know I enjoyed reading it. It was fun. But when I read this story, it really reminds me. We look at it and we're like, man, that's just an out there story, right? But in reality, man, that's a very familiar story to many of us, right? Either we've seen movies very similar to this type of story, or we've even been in relationships that had some similar twists, or not necessarily to that degree, but you know what I mean, like some similar ideas and ways of acting, or maybe we know someone that's been in some type of relationship that has been something like that. But the reality of what we've seen, like we think it's a love story, right? We see it as a love story, but in reality there was no love at all with that relationship, right? Because it says that Samson fell in love with Delilah, but in reality, he was just infatuated by her. He was just infatuated. He wasn't in love. He wasn't in love. He was just infatuated. And Delilah, she obviously acted and faked that she loved him so that she can get something from him, right? What does that mean? What is the definition of that? What does that mean when someone is acting or doing something so they get something from someone? Manipulation. Good. She was manipulating Samson to get something from him. I want to quickly define infatuation and manipulation. Infatuation is an intense, this is dictionary.com, so if you have any issues with the definition, don't blame me. An intense but short-lived passion or admiration for someone or something. There's no question that's what Samson was in, right? He was in this short-lived, intense passion for Delilah. Why do we know that? Because she was obviously trying to get him killed. Like, she would do things and he was there and he was just entertaining her. Like, dude, just leave. Like, she's trying to get you killed. You know what I mean? Like, why wouldn't he just get up and go? Because he was so infatuated. He was so enticed by this idea of this woman loving her that he just couldn't leave. Right? So on his end, he was just infatuated. And on her end, she was manipulating him. So manipulation, this is the definition, is to manage or influence skillfully, especially in an unfair manner, to suit one's purpose or advantage. I find that very interesting, that it's a skillful and unfair manner. No question that was Delilah. Right? She was thinking of ways to influence him, thinking of ways to skillfully manipulate him. And she realized how enticed and infatuated Samson was that she could take advantage of him to the degree of like, hey, just tell me how I can kill you, or tell me how your strength can leave you. Like, and he was like, oh, great, and he was just, I'll lay on your lap, shave my head, it's crazy, right? Infatuation and manipulation is crazy because those are two very common things we see in relationships. Very, very common. Not just in this story, but in everyday life. Everyday life. I want to suggest to you a take-home truth just in the middle of this discussion is that manipulation and infatuation are the demise of true love. They are the destruction of what true love is. Manipulation and infatuation are the demise of true love. I don't know if you find that to be true. I do. There's no question. In this story and in life, I remember going in, this was like 6 years ago, right before I was going to get married, a year or two within my relationship with Shirley. I had this perspective in this view of my relationship, what my relationship in marriage is going to look like, that I think many of us probably assumed going in. I was very in an understanding that, man, I'm going to get married. Marriage is going to make me happy. Marriage is going to make me blissful. The purpose of marriage is that I get all my needs met. Right? That's going in. I just like, yeah. Like, this is just the day of our marriage right here. I'm just going to show you a picture. I was so happy. Woo! I was excited. I was pumped. Eddie married us, if you guys didn't know. If you guys know who Eddie is. Pumped and excited. And if you guys have never seen Shirley not pregnant, there she is. Some of us here have never seen her. That's her not pregnant. Soon, hopefully, you will experience that with her. So I was so excited, right? Married, man, and in my vision, in my understanding of what my marriage was going to look like was, you guys know Aladdin and Jasmine, you know when they're on that carpet, a whole new, and they're just flying through the skies, and there's nothing in the world that can get in their way, right? That guy's the nose fell from. You guys don't remember all that, right? But they were just at bliss, right? They were like, this is my life. This is love right here. This is it. And I had this skewed perspective that, man, Marriage is going to be this blissful. This is what it's all about. This is why I'm getting married. Hey, don't get me wrong. Amen is good. Especially next to your wife. I feel that. That's good. I'm happy, don't get me wrong. But I realized soon after, when all our junk started coming up, when all my messed upness started coming up, when all her messed upness started, when we just started arguing, things were happening, I'm like, wait a minute. What is going on? This is not what I signed up for. What I realized is that, dude, I was so deceived that thinking that I was going into a place of true love, I was living in a place of manipulation and infatuation. I was infatuated by my wife, and I was in a place where I'm going to love her so that I can get something from her, so that she can meet my needs, right? And that wasn't happening, and I was just like, this is not what I signed up for. This is not love. But soon I realized, man, I didn't understand love. I didn't get it. So I was on a journey to find it out. Right? I was on a journey to figure it out because I was lost. So when we talk about love, what passage do we think of? 1 Corinthians 13. It's the love passage. It's spoken in every marriage, every wedding. It was spoken in ours. This is the one you hear. Right? I'm going to read it because it applies. All right? I'm going to read it. Here we go. So you can write this down too, and you can read it later if you'd like. 1 Corinthians 13. You don't have to go there. You can just follow along with me. 4 through 13. It says, actually, it's not 4 through 13. It's 4 through 8. That's a typo. Verse 4. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. Powerful, right? I read that passage like, yes! That's what I want to receive. You know what I mean? Right? Like, we read that, and that's where we are. Like, that's exactly it. I should be loved like that. But then if we look at the other end and say, I should be doing this, that's a lot harder, right? Never to dishonor others, to not be self-seeking. I don't know. That was tough. Selflessness is really hard. Not easily angered in a relationship. To keep no record of wrongs? Get out of here. Get out of here. That's tough. Right? But this is the love path. This is what God says is true love. And we desire it, but it's so hard to give. So hard to give. I love that passage. After grasping this passage and really chewing it and looking at it and trying to understand it, I'm still trying to figure it out, still trying to live it. But I realized soon after that in marriage, man, God wasn't designed for me to be happy. That wasn't the design of marriage. The design of marriage was to make me holy. Right? Was to make me holy. What? Holiness is the purpose. Because love is the very essence of God. Right? Love is the very essence of God. God is love. And if I can live and be in a place of true love and act in a place of true love, who am I acting like? I'm becoming more like God. And that means I'm becoming holier. Because I'm drawing near to Him. So marriage is not made and was not created to make me this happy, blissful dude. No. Marriage was created so that I can draw near and be closer and be more like God himself, and to display true love to my wife. That was the purpose. It's not a feeling and an emotion and this fuzzy feeling. It happens throughout sometimes, no question. But that's not what it is. You really think that Jesus really felt like going to the cross and dying and getting whipped and lashed and spit on and hung and on display to just be No. He did not feel like it, but was that love? The ultimate depiction of love. Ultimate. And he did not feel like it at all. Right? He was bleeding through his pores. That's actually a real stress-related issue that can happen, is when you're so stressed you can have blood come through your pores. That's what he was dealing with, because he didn't want it. But he did it anyway. He did it anyway. True depiction of love. And it's time, and I realize it's time for me to grow up. It's time for me to live in true love. Soon after this passage in 1 Corinthians 13, a few verses later, Paul, he's talking about love, and a few verses later, he goes and he says this, 1 Corinthians 13, verse 11. He says this, he says, when I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. Behind me. And I want to suggest to you that infatuation and manipulation is childish. It is childish. And it has no relation with love whatsoever. And we need to put it behind us. Because it is a sinful, natural thing that our body desires, is to get something from someone. But that needs to go. That childlikeness, that childishness is done with. We need to grow. I need to grow in my love towards my wife, in my love towards my fellow brothers and sisters in Christ, in my love towards my friends, in my love towards my family, in my love towards anyone. My love needs to not desire something in return. God's good. This is the love he displayed. We need to chase the true love. See, in the end of Samson's story is interesting. Because he was so blinded by from true love, right? When he was in the midst of that relationship with Delilah, did he understand true love? No. He was so infatuated and getting manipulated, he did not get it. But in the end, when his eyes got gouged and he was in this desperate place, recognizing, man, I'm done. Really. Because when he cried out to God, it was kind of like this, man, what'd I do? Kind of cry out, you know? Like, please, God. He said, please. Because he understood where he was. And he understood that, God, I need to sacrifice myself right now. I need to sacrifice my life for your glory and for my people to be set free from this bondage of the Philistines. And he recognized in this prayer, in this shout out to God, that it's time to act out in true love. To completely sacrifice his body, to completely destroy everything so that God can be glorified and his people can be set free from bondage. He finally understood true love at the end of his life. He displayed it at the end. True love. I want to go into this passage. 1 John 4, 7 through 12. Continuing this. You can just read along with me. John says this. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God. Because God is love. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his own one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. If you guys didn't understand what love was, look what the Bible says. Verse 10. This is love. Very simple. Not that we love God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. Woo! I love that passage. I promise my wife, and you guys can hold me accountable, all right, because I'm saying this publicly, that I may not live in a place of manipulation and infatuation towards my wife anymore. That I can live in a place of true love, true sacrifice. That when I love her, I do not desire anything in return. That my sacrifice and my love towards her is for her well-being and her well-being only. Now I realize that if I choose to live that way, and she chooses to live that way, then man, our needs will be met. But I'm not doing it so that I hope she gets it and that she would figure it out and do it in return. I do it in faith. I live it in faith, knowing this is what God asked me to do. This is what true love is sacrifice for the sake of someone else's well-being. Nothing else, but for the sake of someone else's well-being. I want to just close with these three main points. Just to close out, you kind of, if there's anything you would get from what we talked about today, these are the three main things. That first off, manipulation and infatuation are the demise of true love. Childish, right? Put them away. Let's get away from them. There's no place for them in love. No place. Secondly, that whenever true love is depicted, you see sacrifice in action for the greater good of another. That's true love. Is sacrifice for the greater good of another. Period. That's what true love is. And an encouragement to you guys, dear friends, just like John said, since God so loved us, through that sacrifice that he showed, we also ought to love one another this way. Let's do that. To our spouse, to our friends, to our brothers and sisters in Christ, even our enemies, exactly. Those at work, those at school, let us love like this, the way Jesus loved.
Lay down your hurt, lay down your heart, come as you are.